Okay, so we're diving deep into a world that most people only think they understand: money laundering. And you've brought this French documentary to the table, which is wild, by the way. I'm ready to get into it.
It's a fascinating look at how this really works.
Yeah, because we always think about money laundering like it's in the movies, right? But it's way more real than that. It's affecting the global financial system as we speak.
Absolutely, and on a massive scale.
So that's why we're doing this deep dive. We're trying to demystify money laundering, understand the players and the techniques, and why you should care.
Because this isn't some victimless crime, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's connected to all sorts of bad stuff, from drug trafficking to funding terrorism. It's destabilizing economies. Honestly, it hits way closer to home than you might realize.
People need to understand that their lives are impacted by this. Their tax dollars could be vanishing into these schemes.
It's crazy. So let's back up for a second. For anyone who's completely new to this, what is money laundering really?
At its simplest, it's taking money obtained illegally and making it look legit.
Okay, so say you just pulled off a huge heist, suitcase full of cash. You can't exactly walk into a bank and deposit that, can you?
You'd raise a few eyebrows, to say the least.
That's an understatement. So what do these criminals do?
They've got a whole process, almost like a recipe. Placement, layering, and integration. Like a washing machine for dirty money.
A washing machine, I like that.
Placement is that first spin cycle, getting the cash into the legal system somehow. Small deposits, payments structured to avoid detection, even using unsuspecting people as mules.
Right, like trying to discreetly stuff a wad of cash into a tiny pocket. Not easy.
And as banks wise up, the criminals have to get more and more creative.
So what happens after that first spin?
Layering. That's where they really try to bury the money trail, make it as hard as possible to trace back.
Sounds complicated.
It can be. Think complex webs of transactions, shell companies moving money across borders, even investments in things like art or real estate.
Trying to make those investigators dizzy just looking at the paper trail.
Exactly. Then you've got the final rinse cycle. Integration. That's where the money comes out squeaky clean.
Ready to spend.
Basically. Back into the economy, looking just like any other income. You'll see them investing in businesses, buying fancy things, trying to make it all look legit.
You know, going through this documentary, one thing that really struck me was how even small-time crooks, they need to launder money too. It's not all high rollers and art auctions, is it?
Not at all. The documentary does a great job of showing how even minor crimes, it creates this need to clean the money. And they get surprisingly creative with it.
Like that whole thing with the fake lottery wins. Seems almost cliche, but I guess it still happens.
It shows how desperate they are to make it look legit. But honestly, with all the technology we have now, banks are way too smart for that to work very often.
Yeah, they've got systems for flagging anything that looks off, right?
Exactly. Suspicious activity reports.
Yeah.
If a bank sees something weird, someone who usually deposits small amounts suddenly putting in a huge chunk of cash, they're required to report it.
So it's all going in some database somewhere. Big Brother is watching those transactions.
In a way, yeah. And that's where those street-level tactics start to fall apart. The documentary talked about that PMU scheme. Remember that? They used horse racing bets in France.
Oh, yeah, taking advantage of the fact that people bet big in those places, so large sums of cash wouldn't necessarily raise flags.
Exactly. They had this network of people buying winning tickets from legitimate bettors, at a markup, of course. Then they deposit those winnings. On paper, looks totally legit.
Blending right in with the crowd. Smart. In theory.
Except they kind of got sloppy. It was the volume, the same people, the same places. Eventually, it just stood out too much. Like delivering bags of cash to the same betting shop every week. Not exactly subtle.
So even if you start small, using money mules, smurfing, the bigger you get, the riskier it becomes.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the human cost in all of this. The documentary talked about how they recruit money mules.
Preying on vulnerable people, making them think it's an easy way to make money.
Right. Move small amounts. Smurfing, they call it. A lot of times, these people have no clue they're caught up in something criminal until it's too late.
And then they're the ones facing the music. It's a good reminder that this isn't just a victimless crime, even though it might seem that way at first.
There are real people getting hurt.
Okay, so we've talked about the smaller operations, but this documentary, it really gets into the big leagues, organized crime. And money laundering on that level, that's a whole different ballgame.
It's like they're running their own financial system, right alongside the real one. Except theirs is designed to break all the rules.
And they've got the resources to do it. Shell companies, moving money across borders, investing in things most of us only dream about.
They're playing for high stakes.
So let's talk about shell companies for a second. It sounds so shady when you say it like that, like something out of a movie.
It's more common than you think. Basically, it's a company that exists only on paper. No employees, no actual business, just an empty shell, maybe a fancy address, and a bank account.
And that's all they need, right?
It's all about creating layers, hiding who really owns the assets, makes it almost impossible to track the money.
And they set these companies up in places where nobody's really looking too closely.
Exactly. Jurisdictions with lax regulations, strong secrecy laws. They're magnets for this kind of activity.
The documentary mentioned Delaware. How does a tiny state like that become a haven for shell companies?
It's become a global hub for incorporations, unfortunately. And it's not just Delaware. You've got certain Caribbean islands, some European countries. It's a big problem.
It's mind-blowing how much money we're talking about just disappearing into this shattered world. And then the whole point is to bring it back out, right? Make it look legit.
Exactly. The integration phase. And that's where you see them getting creative again. Art auctions, luxury goods, anything with a subjective value that can be manipulated.
They were talking about that in the documentary, too. Buying and selling art, driving up prices.
It's a classic move. And it's not just art. Yachts, rare cars, even expensive wine. If you can slap a big price tag on it and there's a market for it, they'll use it.
And who's going to question someone buying a Picasso?
Right. It's all about blending in, making those dirty dollars look indistinguishable from the clean ones.
And then there was that whole thing with the pizza connection. Using pizza places to launder money. It sounds crazy.
It's been a go-to for organized crime for years. Cash-heavy businesses, they're perfect for blending legitimate income with illegal profits. Restaurants, bars, nightclubs.
Hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. And with so many transactions happening, it's easy to fudge the numbers, make it look like the duty money is just coming from paying customers.
The documentary also touched on casinos. I mean, that one's not exactly a surprise.
Casinos have always been a target for money launderers. The sheer volume of cash moving around, the high roller tables, the culture of anonymity, it's a perfect storm.
And with online gambling becoming more popular, it's even harder to track.
Absolutely. It's a constantly evolving challenge for law enforcement and financial institutions.
Well, the documentary did say they're not just sitting back and letting it happen. They talked about all these tools and strategies they're using to fight back.
Technology is playing a huge role. Data analytics, artificial intelligence, they're using it all to spot patterns, identify suspicious activity, and connect the dots.
It's like a game of cat and mouse.
Right, exactly. And as technology evolves, so do the methods of both the criminals and those trying to catch them, especially with things like cryptocurrencies becoming more mainstream.
It's a whole new world out there.
It is. But the key takeaway here is that this isn't just a victimless crime. It affects everyone.
Right, like we were talking about earlier, our tax dollars, the global economy.
It undermines our institutions, fuels corruption, funds criminal activity. It's something we all need to be aware of.
So it's not just about catching the bad guys, it's about preventing it from happening in the first place.
Exactly. And that starts with understanding how it works, recognizing the signs, and being vigilant. Because the more we know about money laundering, the harder it is for them to hide.
Knowledge is power. I like that. Well, that was quite a deep dive. This documentary definitely opened my eyes to a world I knew existed but didn't fully grasp.
It's a hidden world with very real consequences.
For all of us. So next time you hear about money laundering, remember what we talked about today. It's not just something that happens in the movies. It's real, it's happening now, and it affects us all. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and stay curious.